The film commences with a spellbinding advertisement showcasing the groundbreaking Monolith car brand, renowned for being the epitome of automotive safety. The presenter accentuates a myriad of cutting-edge safety features, encompassing shatterproof glass, durable tires, a robust chassis, and more, all meticulously designed to guarantee unparalleled security for its passengers. The seamless orchestration of these functions is facilitated through an AI-enabled smartphone application, with Lilith, a virtual assistant, seamlessly enhancing user interaction. In the subsequent scene, we're introduced to Sandra, a mother carrying her 2-year-old son, David, in the same high-tech AI car as they head to visit her mother-in-law. During their conversation with Lilith, we gain insight into Sandra's life, her son David and her husband Carl, a pilot unable to join them due to his demanding schedule. Later, Sandra receives a call from Carl, who has completed his duty at the Central Airport and expresses his longing for them. During their conversation, a knock at the door interrupts them, and Carl bids farewell. Sandra, seeking to calm David, gives him her smartphone to keep him entertained. Afterward, Sandra makes a brief stop at a roadside gas station, taking David inside. As she shops, she notices someone attempting to break into her car. Unfazed, she calmly uses her smartphone to activate the smart app, securing the vehicle. Yet, in the midst of this, she inadvertently loses sight of David. Panic sets in as Sandra realizes David is missing, frantically searching for him within the supermarket and even approaching strangers thinking they might have him. Her distress persists until she locates David with the same 3 ladies she encountered in the restroom earlier. With relief, Sandra places David back in the car, activating the vault mode feature to block out external disturbances. Resuming their journey, Sandra still has a considerable distance to cover before reaching at destination. Boredom sets in, prompting her to call her childhood friend Jessa for a chat. Jessa's revelation that she's near the Central Airport at a hotel with Carl devastates Sandra, fueling suspicions of infidelity. Frustration mounts, and upon arriving at her mother-in-law's house, Sandra doesn't even enter. She repeatedly calls Carl, who avoids her calls. Fed up with the deceit, Sandra takes matters into her own hands, embarking on a quest to find Carl at the Central Airport in Los Angeles. A road sign indicates that Los Angeles is roughly 320 miles away. Later, Lilith, the AI assistant, alerts Sandra to a significant accident on the main highway, suggesting an alternate route with fewer travelers. Determined to confront her husband, Sandra chooses the less-traveled path. Night falls, and Sandra faces challenges with dense fog on this desolate route, void of human settlements or vehicles except for an isolated electrical substation. Although Sandra briefly observes the location, she continues her journey, surrounded only by wildlife. Suddenly, a distracted Sandra collides with a deer trying to cross the road, causing David to cry. Sandra, as always, hands her smartphone to David to soothe him. She then checks on the injured animal, discovering it nearly lifeless and blocking her car's path. In the midst of this situation, Sandra inadvertently leaves David unattended in the car. Meanwhile, David, playing with the cell phone, accidentally activates the vault feature, safeguarding the passengers from potential disturbances and dangers. Sandra comes to a sobering realization of the dire circumstances and attempts to open the car door, but her efforts are futile. She finds herself locked out of the vehicle, desperately trying to communicate with her 2-year-old son, David, in a futile attempt to disable the vault mode. However, David is too young to comprehend her words and continues playing with the phone. In a state of panic, Sandra resorts to shouting at the child, startling him, causing him to drop the smartphone under his seat. In this critical moment, Sandra discovers the Monolith car's features are not just a marketing ploy. Her attempts to break the unyielding glass with a rock prove fruitless, as not a single scratch appears on the window. Faced with this impervious barrier, Sandra realizes she must explore alternative options and retraces her steps to the electrical substation she had noticed earlier. After a considerable walk, she reaches the substation, clambers over the fence, and calls out for assistance. Unfortunately, her cries fall on deaf ears, as the station seems devoid of any personnel. Sandra ventures into one of the rooms and locates essential items, including a flashlight and a wrench to shatter the car's window. Upon departing from the substation, she notices a wild animal tailing her. In a frantic rush, a coyote attacks Sandra, prompting her to seek refuge on top of the car. Despite her attempts to scare off the relentless creature, it remains undeterred. In a final act of desperation, Sandra resorts to banging on the car with the wrench, triggering an alarm that finally drives the coyote away. Sandra then turns her attention to David, who is struggling to breathe. Despite the dire circumstances, she manages to soothe David, and he eventually falls asleep. Exhausted and drained, Sandra succumbs to fatigue and falls asleep on the car's hood. The following day, Sandra awakens to the warmth of the morning sun. Anxious, she rushes to check on David's condition inside the car, discovering him weak in dehydration. The car's system displays the escalating temperature in the surroundings, compounding Sandra's distress, with no signs of other humans nearby. With no other option, Sandra resolves to seek help and embarks on her journey, though she herself is parched and suffering from dehydration. She recognizes the dangers of leaving David in the sweltering car but has no alternative. Along her path, she stumbles upon a river, quenching her thirst and freshening up. After a moment of respite, she continues her trek, confronting steep hills in her path. After covering several miles, Sandra finally arrives at an abandoned airfield hosting a derelict jet. In the meantime, the temperature within the Monolith car continues to rise, activating the emergency cooling fan. Inside the abandoned jet, Sandra discovers alcoholic beverages, a gallon of gasoline, a lighter, and a pair of spare airplane tires. She consumes some alcohol and collects the necessary items. Using the gasoline, she ignites the 2 tires, hoping the smoke will attract assistance. Sandra takes the gallon and fills it with river water before returning to the location where she left David. In the ensuing scene, Sandra races to the car and discovers David in a perilous state, weak and crimson from the heat. Despite her cries, David remains unresponsive. The car's interior has become an oven, rendering the emergency cooling fans useless. Sandra, desperate to cool her son, climbs onto the roof and pours the river water she brought, but her efforts prove futile. Driven by desperation, Sandra attempts to shatter the car window with the wrench, but the task drains her energy, yielding no results. Later, she tries to create a fire nearby, hoping the smoke will trigger the car's sensors to open the windows. However, the emergency cooling fans shut down to prevent smoke intake. Exhausted, Sandra collapses to the ground. As she lies there, Sandra envisions a future where she and Carl revisit the accident site, haunted by her past mistakes and still blaming Carl for David's demise. She startles awake to a noise, realizing it was just a dream. To add to her anguish, the coyote from the previous night reappears. Sandra opts to hide and attempts to climb onto the car roof. However, the scorching car temperature makes it impossible to stay there, so she slides beneath the vehicle. The coyote bites her leg, revealing it's actually after the deer. When the coyote drags the deer away, the car starts rolling backward, restrained by the animal. Sandra fights to prevent the car from sliding off the cliff. Despite her utmost efforts, the car inches closer to the edge. Finally, a small rock obstructs its movement, stopping it on the brink. Peering down from the cliff, Sandra recalls a cartoon she saw at the gas station, depicting a diamond being obtained after breaking a safe. She contemplates pushing the car off the cliff to unlock the doors, fully aware of the risks involved. She grabs the wrench and begins breaking the rock blocking the tire. After successfully dislodging the rock, Sandra intentionally nudges the car off the cliff, David still inside. As the car plummets, its embedded AI detects the fall and deploys its features to maintain balance, studying gravitational pressure to ensure David's safety. Since the car is designed to deactivate the vault mode during an accident, the doors finally open. Upon impact, Sandra rushes to the car. Despite the terrifying fall, the car appears undamaged. Sandra swiftly retrieves David and removes his clothes to help him cool down. Witnessing David's fragile state, Sandra is resolute in leaving the area swiftly. Before departing, Sandra restarts the car's system. With Lilith's guidance, she sets the car to extreme off-road mode and begins ascending the cliff before her. The car adeptly handles the challenging conditions and conquers the steep incline effortlessly. Miraculously, Sandra reaches the off-road path she selected and steers towards the hospital. Finally, Sandra and David arrive at the hospital. David, frail and connected to several tubes, lies in a hospital bed next to Sandra. She watches over him impatiently until he finally opens his eyes and is addressed as Mommy. The film ends with Sandra's overwhelming joy that her son recognizes her.